You got it. Well, thank you everybody for having me. I'm Sara Leedom, and I am a new beekeeper, less than 1 year old. So I feel a little intimidated to talk with you guys, considering there's a lot of knowledge and experience in this room. But I hope that what I can share is maybe a perspective that that other people don't have. And so between what you guys know and what I know, maybe it'll be an interesting conversation in patching together some different perspectives. So that's my hope for today. So again, thanks for having me. So this is me. I live on Whidbey Island for part of the year, and the rest of the year I am in Kigali, Rwanda. I run a nonprofit there. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a professional beekeeper. I'm not a researcher. And my background in education has also been in both business and literature, but certainly not science or anthropology. And so this is an exciting chance for me to explore some different things. And Ellie, I might ask you also if you can just maybe mute yourself too. I hear a little buzzing in the background. Sounds like you've got some bees working on your side. So a lot of people have heard of Rwanda for two things, really. The 1994 genocide against the Tutsi and also mountain gorillas. But Rwanda is a tiny little country right below the equator. And it's a home to about 12 million people, including me for about the past 10 years. And you can see up in this photo, this is tea plantations and volcanoes, which are in Rwanda's north, which is incredibly beautiful. So if anybody wants to come to Rwanda, you have a place to stay with me, so come on over. And my organization works with entrepreneurs. So I work in Rwanda, Kenya, and Ethiopia, helping people start small businesses, including in refugee camps. So my focus really is on economic development, not on beekeeping. So again, I'm out of my depth here, but hoping I can share some interesting perspectives with you. In addition to working in Rwanda, we also have an office in Ethiopia. This photo on the left is just a photo I took at a grocery store in Ethiopia, where you just have so many different types of honey, just, you know, at any different grocery store you go to. You'll have this bright orange honey, a white honey that's made in the Tigray region in the north on some sagebush flowers. And Ethiopia also turns honey into what is called tej, which is the local honey wine or mead there. And this is a traditional vessel that tej is served in at restaurants all over the country. In Ethiopia, there's actually even a town that is named after bees. There was an emperor named Lalibela, and his name translates to the bees recognize his sovereignty, because as a small child, he was covered in a swarm, and his mother thought that was a good sign that he had a good life ahead of him. And indeed, when he became the emperor of Lalibela, the town was also named after him. And so this is a church in Lalibela that is carved down into the stone. It's really beautiful, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But back to the bees. So sub-Saharan Africa has Apis mellifera. So it's the same bee that we have here, a different subsect. It's the Scutellata, and it is same as honeybees that we would find in the US, great honey producers. These honeybees are a little bit more aggressive, but one of the other things that's pretty spectacular about them is that they're resistant to Varroa. So through natural selection or environmental situations, we do not have the same problems with Varroa mite in East Africa as we face in the US, which is exciting because it means we don't have to deal with all kinds of different treatments. In Rwanda, bees are usually kept in these long banana leaf tubes. And you can see this woman on the left is weaving this banana leaf as you would a basket. And basically there's an entrance on one side of the hive where the Apis mellifera can come in, and then the back side of the hive opens up, and it's also a place where you can remove the honeycomb out of the back as well. Sometimes though, and more often than not, it's not just removing the back and removing a couple of slices of honeycomb, but often the entire hive is destroyed. And because the bees can be quite aggressive, there is a lot of smoke used. If we're talking about quality of honey, the honey that you often find in East Africa is not always fabulous because it has such residual smoke flavor in it. So it drops down a couple points on the honey scale for rankings of quality honey. But there are some innovations that are happening in East Africa to improve on these banana leaf hives. And this hive right here is basically the banana leaf shape, but with removable frames in wood. And so I think this is an organization called The Hive that sells beekeeping tools and also does education. And so this is a great new way that people are starting to manage bees in East Africa. One of the challenges, though, is that for the average beekeeper in East Africa who's using this as subsistence income, the access to wood, the cost of the hive is often much out of reach for the average beekeeper. So this is definitely something that I, as a Westerner, could say, okay, I'm going to invest, $150, $200 on buying a hive. But it's often out of reach for most households in East Africa, unfortunately. One of the other types of hives that you find pretty common in East Africa is the Kenyan Top Bar Hive. And it has, as is described, really just a thin bar across the top without any sort of preset frame or any wax starter bars. And so the bees really just build the comb really in sort of the shape of the natural curve that you might find in the wild. And so these are starting to show up more and more. Again, same problem with accessibility based on price for the average beekeeper, but people are finding that this at least has a little bit less requirements of figuring out additional brood boxes to keep adding. And the amount of wood for the bar is just a small bit of wood. So a little bit more accessible to people. What's exciting about this is that there's an organization that's operating in Kenya and Tanzania called Elephants and Bees. And one of the things that's super cool is that bees are actually used as stewards by farmers to help protect their farmland. So as magnificent as elephants are, they wreak havoc on farmland. And so farmers who, they're trying to feed their families, their livelihood is connected very much to the food that they can put on the table or sell in the market. They see elephants coming, and there is poaching that happens really of elephants that are coming into farmland. But because bees are really terrified of elephants, farmers are starting to use fences that have these hives basically strung up between posts along the perimeter of their farmland. The bees basically go up into the elephant's trunk, which is, as one might imagine, even with a small nose, a bee up the trunk might not feel too comfortable. So elephants are terrified of bees. And so they become almost this natural perimeter. So while we're here worried about bears, bees themselves are actually providing a really great eco-perimeter, which keeps elephants safe and away from farmers who might be tempted to become poachers. And it also allows farmers themselves to protect their land. So I think it's a pretty cool flip on that relationship. But while I can talk a little bit about bees in Africa, really what I know about beekeeping, I don't have a farm, I don't have elephants, I don't, that's not my situation. I wish it was. But I actually learned beekeeping the way many of you did through apprentice courses in the Pacific Northwest. So for those of you who've taken classes online with Carolyn Brees at Oregon State University, there she is in the middle. And this was a great way for me to get an introduction to the basics of beekeeping, but obviously within the context of where we are, right? I mean, we're hearing the cheerleading song at the beginning, location, location, location. And I think that was the perfect wind up to this conversation, because everything that I learned for beekeeping in the Pacific Northwest does not help me as somebody who lives half time and wants to keep bees in Africa, obviously. But I think when I really got into beekeeping in Africa, I didn't realize just how different it was until I made some mistakes. And then you realize what information you have and what is not accessible to you. So this is me on the left. After a few YouTube videos and some bravado, attempted to capture a swarm in a friend's house in urban Kigali, which is where I live, and missed the queen, right? I not sure what happened, but the next day my friend called me back and said, well, Sarah, you got about half the bees, but there's a bunch here and something went wrong. And so clearly I missed the queen. And when I went back to capture the queen the second day, she was wise to me and took off with all of her workers, and away they went. And I was no better off for having bees. So I met with some local beekeepers, and these guys on the right are two brothers who have been beekeeping since they're about 12 years old. And you can't see it in this photo, but he is covered in bee stings, sort of all over his chest at this point in the evening, when they were willing to remove one of those traditional hives from a tree, take it down, and give me the whole hive. They were not willing to sell me a queen. In the sort of cultural context, that is a unit, that is a single organism. And the culture around beekeeping would not allow them to sell me a hive, or a queen. They'd be very happy to say, here's the whole thing. So an entire hive with queen and bees and whatever honey was in there was the bargain price of $12. And they were willing to give me the whole thing. For a variety of reasons, that wasn't going to work in my urban backyard in Kigali, but this was a whole process of going to check that out. But in the rigmarole of where can I find information, where can I get a queen, what information transfers from the Pacific Northwest to East Africa and what doesn't, it really brought up for me questions around how culture influences beekeeping. And so that was something that I really wanted to explore a little bit more. So in addition to getting to know all about bee biology and honey extraction and there really were questions for me that were coming up around how culture influences bees and beekeeping. And so in Kigali, in Rwanda, I was interested in seeing how practices had evolved. Were there any pieces of information that I had access to from classes in Oregon that could be helpful to beekeepers in East Africa? Was there anything that I was learning in East Africa that could actually be helpful in how we do things here? So that's really a little bit of the path I've gone on. And so my organization has a great sabbatical policy, and I have the amazing luxury of having a couple months off. And I am traveling to some different places to learn from people all around the world around how beekeeping is done. So I've been to the upper half of this page, not to the lower half, but these are some of the diverse countries that I've been able to meet with people. And so, you know, I just as a caveat, I have titled this presentation "A Glimpse," right? I mean, there's I'm only seeing things through this set of eyes and this filter of knowledge. And there's, for language and cultural differences and being an outsider, there's only so much information I am able to access. And so I'm doing my best in this conversation to present what I've seen, with, taking a lot of liberties and asking much forgiveness from the communities that I'm representing here, that I'm not coming anywhere close to representing in the way that somebody from one of these communities would be representing themselves. So just sort of acknowledging the perspective and the power and privilege that I have of offering this perspective, but knowing that it's absolutely incomplete. So caveat to what I'll share. So here's my caveat. This is very different than my normal life, right? So this is a photo of meeting with some grad students at the University of Chiang Mai and sort of being in a bee research lab for the first time, looking at Apis dorsata broodcomb. It's fascinating. So I started my travels in Sri Lanka, not necessarily someplace that comes to mind immediately as a top producer of honey in the world, but a good friend of mine runs a honey company called Elevated Honey in China, and due to a variety of COVID travel restrictions, was not able to meet with her. But she had suggested a couple different people that I might want to check out, and Sri Lanka was on that list. So Apis mellifera, our home girl here in the middle, is the one that we all know. And so she is not present in tropical Sri Lanka, but is put here in this slide as a comparison between the two main honeybees that are present in Sri Lanka. Apis cerana, which is the domesticated bee, and Apis dorsata, which is the wild bee that really does not like to be inside and will not stay in a hive. But these little, kind, gentle Apis cerana are really great for beekeepers. They don't swarm much, and they're quite a chill little bee. So traditionally, beekeeping in Sri Lanka happens in clay pots. And so this is here at a workshop where a group of people are learning how to basically take these elements of comb and transfer them into a Langstroth box. But as you can see, the only way that they can access the comb is, and the bees, and by checking on them, and is really to break the hive. So it's quite disruptive, coming back to the issue we had also with the banana hives in East Africa, that in order to reach the bees, there's a lot of destruction that happens. And so all of the effort for bees to reproduce their wax, get themselves reestablished every time, it's not great for bees, and it's also not great for the productivity that beekeepers are also looking for. But traditionally, that has been the way it's been done. There are now some split hives. So it's basically, instead of one round clay vessel, it's two clay vessels, one on the bottom and one on the top, where you can actually just separate those out. And so instead of it being sort of a curved small entrance, two wider entrances are allowing people to get a little bit more access to the colony. One of the things that I found was really interesting in Sri Lanka was the presence of Ayurvedic medicine. And in addition to bees gathering pollen and nectar, whenever there were challenges that the beekeepers were facing with any illness in the hives, they were actually using plants and the Ayurvedic principles related to those to treat the hives. And so, there are about 600 different types of Ayurvedic medicine that use honey, but then also using plants to treat the hives themselves. So this plant on the left is one that's used to treat sackbrood. And so they'll often bring the flowers close to the hive to really kind of fortify the hive. So I thought this was also an interesting way that culture and treatment options were very closely linked in Sri Lanka. So from there, I went to Thailand. And Thailand also has the same two main honeybees, the Apis cerana and the Apis dorsata. And this woman was in a community about 45 minutes north of Chiang Mai. So it's in the northern region of Thailand. There's a lot of tea as the main cash crop, and then also shade-grown coffee. And so really trying to work with what are the ways that they can increase coffee yields and coffee productions with cultivating beehives kind of at the edge of their coffee crops. So they're seeing that it's a 25% increase in coffee yield based on having additional hives at the border of their forest. So this woman was in a workshop where she was introduced to Langstroth hives. And previously she had been using what is on the left here, which is a log hive. And in that training, learned about Langstroth hives. It was the first time that she had also heard about smoking bees. That was not a practice that was used previously, nor was any sort of food supplements, sugar syrups, pollen patties, nor was any kind of medicine. And so when I was explaining to her of, oh, well, do you ever use sugar syrup, or do you ever use, this or that? The look on her face was, she was a little crestfallen to find out how much management actually goes into honeybee rearing in the US. And so it was really just a fascinating conversation. I was learning from her, and her eyes were certainly showing her dismay at how we also use different tools and techniques for honeybee rearing. What I appreciated about meeting with this woman, and she was the one woman out of a whole group of beekeepers. It was an all-male co-op of beekeepers, and she was the one woman. And she only actually got into this beekeeping co-op because her husband developed an allergic reaction to bee stings. And so he had been in the co-op, got stung a few times, and she was taking his place after he said, "No more for me." But yet the language around that in the bee co-op, they were still very convinced that women would not be able to be beekeepers because they could not handle the pain, even though the one woman in the group was a swap out for sort of the allergic reaction and pain and issues that came up with beekeeping. But what she and the other beekeepers did is they took the lessons from the training, which was about hive management, and they blended it. And so that to me started to move almost from a conversation around not what are the beekeeping practices, but almost where do you get knowledge around beekeeping? Who is determining what works and what doesn't? And she had such a passion and such a deep observational understanding of her bees that she was able to pull things that were useful for her and that worked with the bees, but she, through observation, was also able to identify what wasn't working. And so really having that kind of blended knowledge, I thought was pretty cool. The Apis cerana bees were cool. The Apis dorsata bees blew my mind. And these guys are huge. They're giant honeybees, apparently quite a doozy of a sting. Fortunately, I did not have that experience. But these are wild bees which don't like dark cavities. And so every time that there's an attempt to put them into a hive, they find their way back out. And so I met with a group of traditional honey hunters, and that was actually the way that honey has been harvested pre-colonization. So beekeeping as a practice only happened in Thailand and parts of Asia with the introduction of colonization, as is true in many parts of the world. And so this comb was cut out from a limb of a tree. What you can't see here is that sort of just above what you're seeing in this image is what's called a honey head. And so the honey is actually the element that is attached most closely to the branch. So in order to harvest the honey, you have to cut that honey head off, which means that the entire brood comb comes off as well. And so there's been some work with honey hunters, traditional honey hunters, to really encourage them to leave at least 30% of these combs up in the tree so that it doesn't actually destroy the entire hive. But they can be up to 2 meters long. They're ginormous. And so here is our Apis dorsata, the giant Asian honeybee. And on the tree, those half moon loops are each a different colony that have established themselves on different branches in the tree. And so they're almost designated trees that are sort of seen in the community as honey trees. So I went with some older gentlemen to go out and go honey hunting. So these guys were actually commissioned by the University of Chiang Mai. So I felt a little bit better that the research the comb that they were cutting down was actually coming back for research purposes, which helped resolve a little bit of a pit in my stomach about cutting out this beautiful brood comb. But it's a group of 5 guys. They're all in their 70s. They have been doing honey hunting together for 30 years. They each have their distinct roles, and the guy on the right is the one who climbs the tree. So not only does he need a bee suit that protects him from bee stings, he also has a modified motorcycle helmet to protect him from a potential fall out of the tree. So he was quite suited up with rubber gloves, and his outfit is rice bags that were sewed together. And so the 2 gentlemen on the right will stay down below the tree, light a smoker, and have smoke come up from the ground up to the tree while their friend is in the tree working and cutting the honeycomb. So it was pretty fascinating. And for the men, they were as interested in the larva, to eat the brood larva, as they were in the quality of the honey to sell. So I think this also raises a question around, what is the future of honey hunting? This is clearly a traditional practice. Clearly some questions around what this means for wild populations of bees. They are not able to find right now anybody in the next generation who's interested in this practice. Younger people are saying it's too dangerous or not worth it. The question for me was really not about, is it good or bad that this practice dies out, but what knowledge do these guys have that isn't being passed on to the next generation if there's not people who are wanting to carry on some of those understandings of at least traditional ways, whether or not they choose to practice honey hunting or not. And last but not least, in Thailand, one of the bees that I thought was really most interesting and creating a really unique flavor of honey were these tiny little stingless bees. And they are just minuscule. So we go from these giant Apis dorsata down to these little tiny bees. So instead of the Apis dorsata that can have 60,000 bees in a colony, these little stingless bees have about 500 bees in their colony, and they're in these very cute little boxes, quite adorable. And they are recently more under cultivation in Thailand based on the value in pollination. Because they're so small, they can actually get into some smaller flowers, particularly the coffee flowers, for some better pollination, more complete pollination than they're seeing with the Apis cerana. So there's some new possibilities of using these tiny little stingless bees for pollination. And their honey is in these small little pots, which has a really high water content, ferments easily, and therefore has this very distinct lemony flavor. It tastes very different from most honeys that I've been used to before. So and there's part of what it looks like on the inside of a comb or the inside of a hive. It looks really, really different from what Apis cerana hives look like. Whoops. And we're moving through a little video here, but I'll keep going on that. And so most recently, I just was able to visit another type of stingless bee in Mexico. So in the Yucatan Peninsula on the eastern side of Mexico, there are traditional stingless bees that are raised by Mayan communities for forever and ever, and similarly are used for this lemony, astringent honey. And in fact, the Mayan Codex, which is sort of the cross between a farmer's almanac and a religious text, really has the description for how to raise honeybees according to Mayan principles. And so these two young people are two people who have been recently reintroduced to raising these tiny little stingless bees for honey. And I met with them by meeting with a group called EcoSur. The Bee Lab, Abejas EcoSur, has a couple different locations across Mexico. And I met with the team that's in Chiapas. And part of the reason why I was interested in going there is because they're really focused on how biology interacts with social issues, cultural issues. And so for my purpose of understanding how beekeeping practices and culture interact, they were really a great partner for me and were very kind and generous in spending about a week and a half with me, showing me around lots of different things. So this was everything from bumblebee research. There are apparently only a few communities in the world that consume bumblebee honey in Chile and then also in some Nordic countries. And one of the researchers had identified a community that's just north of Guatemala that has started to consume bumblebee honey, sort of digging nests out of the ground. Again, farmers are working their fields, running across bumblebees. Some farmers are stuffing those bumblebee nests with fire. Others are covering them gently with dirt and giving the bumblebees time to dig themselves out from the bumblebee nests under the ground, while the farmers themselves go ahead and do what they need to do. So one farmer mentioned that, well, I have a job to do as a farmer and the bumblebee has a job to do, and we can be in a good relationship if we both respect that we each have our own job. But lots of good research on bumblebee and culture. Lots of research on industrial agriculture, as Mexico is developing more and more large production sites for shipping produce around the world. They're starting to use more industrial practices and have more monoculture, and looking at what that means for bee health. And then also looking at imported bee species. So certainly Africanized bees kind of coming from Southern America further up. There's a much larger presence of Africanized bees in Mexico, but then also there's been some purposeful importation of different types of bumblebees, in particular for pollinating tomato crops, and looking at what that's doing for changing the situation for bees that have been other honey producers, when there's now a bit more of a resource challenge, resource sharing for new types of bees that are becoming invasive in Mexico. And this is part of what they're doing in addition to this research is community education. And so they have an on-site graphic designer who did all of this beautiful artwork to do lots of conversations with the community around what is a pollinator, what do you do when you run into a pollinator, how to have a more pollinator-friendly environment, particularly focused on bees, butterflies, and birds. So they were pretty cool. Also recognizing that many of the communities that they're trying to reach are oral tradition communities, or may not have Spanish language reading skills. And so trying to make things as visually descriptive to pass on communication in ways that were meaningful to the community. So again, this is looking at ways that information is passed around beekeeping practices and traditions. And then finally, one of my guides, the last little bit, was this guy named Lazaro. And Lazaro started beekeeping when he was 3 years old. He comes from an Aztec family in Puebla, and he was sort of adopted by these neighbors who took him in and taught him beekeeping. So this is Lazaro when he's 8 years old, and down in the lower corner is a picture of these neighbors that had taught him from the age of 3. But Lazaro also does the stingless bees. His mom was, to purchase their first family beehive, his mom traded a turkey for 2 hives. And then from there continued to sort of build out this whole apiary. And so now Lazaro at 34 years old has 500 hives, and has really dedicated his life to this stingless bee and raising the stingless bee. And so he now, as an adult, has gone on to teach other young people around stingless beekeeping. And so passing that tradition, even as a young person, with a traditional understanding, particularly around stingless bees. So this is a hive, again, as I showed you before, the one in Thailand, that small square box. But this is a double-decker stingless beehive, and it's just the smallest little entrance. And so these are 2 young people, they're cousins, Melchor and Anna, who are raising these stingless bees for honey, and also just for cultural preservation, honestly. And this is a video that I will show just quickly of what a hive inspection looks like.
La cual eso indica que sí.
Pero cuando hay frío no
es recomendable abrir. Esta colonia ya casi está lista para vivir.
What I love about, well, my Spanish is terrible, but for those who, I can follow along enough to hear Melchor say, it's not recommended when it's cold to open the hive. So he didn't define cold in this conversation, but it's universal apparently that you got to keep these little guys warm. So this also I thought was just incredibly beautiful around, instead of the hives, the brood comb being vertical, in this stingless bee, it's horizontal, and it's these waxy golden plates that are just stacked on top of each other. So the center column of the hive is the brood comb, and then around that are honey pots, which I'll show in the next slide. And then this waxy covering on top is called cerumen, which is a word that I had never heard of before. Maybe you guys know that word, but that was new to me. But it's the brood comb, the cerumen, the honey on the outside, and then sticky propolis everywhere on the outer edges. There we go. I left off the slide here. So maybe you can see just sort of, let me annotate here. So this here is all of the honey stores, and it's in these pots. And so to extract the honey, you have to use a syringe to pot by pot extract the honey, which was just amazing. And so a typical hive can have about 5 liters of honey in the course of a year, and they'll usually sell about 2 to 3 liters, and the rest is really kept for home use. Honey droplets, you can put them directly into your eye to be used for cataracts, and is really seen as just a powerful and potent medicine. So much more focus on the medicinal value of beekeeping rather than the commercial value of honey, or certainly not as a sweetener. And then the next, and I think pretty much my last slide. Let me turn off the annotation here. There we go. How do I get rid of my annotation? Can we delete that? Well, you guys are going to have to deal with a little scribble. I'm not quite sure how to get rid of that one. But the sort of final thing I wanted to share was something that Anna had shared, and really sort of encapsulated part of what I just thought was super special about this time, is that she was able to say without really kind of any prompting that part of the reason why she's a young beekeeper is because it is, you know, bees are crucial to the relationship that she has with her culture and her food and her community. And for her, more than anything, it's in her heart. And so really just felt super, super lucky to be able to have gone from this journey in Rwanda with missing a hive to having so many people being willing to share different perspectives, and really just being so blown away by the beauty of different types of bees, the various different ways that people find information and interact with bees. And for me, I think the question that comes to all of us as we are also thinking about, you know, we're not without our own beekeeping culture, right? So we may be swimming in our own stew for long enough to not always be able to see it. But when we think about what are our own beekeeping traditions that we want to pass on, how do we do beekeeping? What are the things that we're teaching others about beekeeping? And more importantly, I know that each of us, you know, we come to these conversations because we want to learn. So I'm curious to know what people want to learn, even beyond the cultures that we see already. Where else can we learn amazing things? So I will stop there. Thank you for going through this with me. You guys you're my guinea pigs. This is the first time I've presented all of this. So hopefully it was useful. I very much welcome feedback, criticisms, questions, suggestions of where to go next, and really appreciate all of your time and the conversation. So with that, I'll wrap it up there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was so special. I mean, yeah, the bees are in your hearts. I like that part. And just how people do things. It's really great.
Yeah, it was really
Wow.
fantastic. Let me see if I can stop sharing. There we go. Stop sharing. Turn that off. Great. Does anybody have any questions? I'm opening up the chat box. Thank you for the kudos for those in the in those notes, but any questions or comments that I can answer? Or maybe if you guys have seen beekeeping in other places where you've seen it that has been impressive to you.
One thing that struck me about the cultural, how you see things, and the people who didn't want to take the queen out of the hive, that's unnatural. It is a whole. You cannot separate it. When I was selling chickens, I sold chickens for about 5 years, and the people who most like chickens, it's part of their life, a lot of them are from other countries. They've come to America and to this area of Washington, and it was really interesting. There were people who did not want to buy hens without a rooster. They said the balance isn't right. It's wrong. And they're right. They're actually right, because if you have good roosters, I mean, this is kind of unrelated, but when you have a good rooster, a rooster who has not been bred for color or size or something like that, they behave differently around the hens. They are with the hens. They call the hens. They do little courtship dances. It's really kind of cute for around the hens. And they don't get aggressive toward people because they have a place and their society. So I like the idea that you don't take the queen out. She's the mother of the hive and she's supposed to be there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think like and it was such a wake-up call for me because I was like, well, what do you mean I can't just have a queen? Like we all know that you can just make another queen, right? Like this is possible, right? And so I think it was a difference between what is possible and what is acceptable. And to have that through the filter of community or culture was an aha moment for me, for sure. And I realize I, you know, sort of brought in some different types of bees here besides the ones that we know. So some of it certainly won't be applicable to everybody, but sort of continuing to see what people are exploring in different places. Oh, and Anthony, I'm glad to see you've spent some time with the mountain gorillas. They're amazing, amazing, amazing animals. Life-changing to spend time with those guys. Great.
One thing that occurs to me is, okay, they make the banana leaf hives in the one place, and you have the clay pots, and we went to Langstruth and we put the bees in the same equipment all the time. We don't even traditionally in the United States scorch the insides of the hives or something. There's no renewal. And I just wonder if they're more right. It's illegal for us to keep skep hives, but it was different, and I wonder again if it's more natural for the bees. And actually, would you even want to put them in Langstruth hives if you had this tradition of this home for them that they move from one to the other, that they don't have to live in forever?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think one of the things that this has brought up for me is to sort of start to poke around and look at what are the different approaches that are being used within the US, right? I mean, so at Oregon State University, they have a cool apiary, and they have maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 different types of hives there. So they've got a log hive, they have the traditional Langstroth box, they've got the Wari hive. The Wari hive that they have is built like a beautiful pagoda. I mean, it's just like really, really gorgeous. And I think that there are, different ways that that there are little pockets of different options, even within the US and with different beekeeping philosophies. There is I took a course at the College of Marin called Reimagining Beekeeping, and it was really looking not so much even at beekeeping, but almost at rewilding bees or sort of bees in tree cavities. Slightly different than a traditional beekeeping as we think about in the US. But even when we look at the history of the Langstroth hive, when we've sort of have consolidated around that, but the traditional way to prepare a skep, to go from just being this raw, round basket, was to fill the skep with acorns and have a pig eat out the acorns. And there was something about the saliva of the pig eating the acorns that started to break down some of the fibers of the inside of the skep, which made it much more smooth and much more acceptable for bees. So I think even within our own, for me, sort of Western European traditions, and that's my lineage and my family. I mean, even within my own linear path back, thinking about what are the different ways that things have evolved and the different innovations within that. So yeah, I can imagine, can you imagine in the spring getting your nuke box and finding a neighbor's pig and putting some acorns in it and having that box sort of eaten out to be ready to receive your nuke? It's I think there's lots of knowledge that may be lost along the way that is still interesting for even the evolution from a skep to the Langstroth hive.
I wanted to ask, you showed the picture of the 2 brothers moving the hive at night. Would they ever move hives in Africa during the day? You just do what you have to do, or do they do a lot of nighttime?
Yeah, so that was where I was getting really nervous. Well, I mean, there were many places where I got really nervous with that one. I mean, everything that I've read, right, is that bees don't like white light. So you don't inspect a hive with a flashlight, right? Because that white light is agitating for the bees. So I'm like, how are we going to do this, guys? How are we going to be in the dark on the side of a mountain in, Eastern Africa and moving, 40,000 bees out of a bamboo into the back of my truck. And we had a tarp. I took a shower curtain, and we were going to move this hive, wrap it up. I was going to put it in the back of my truck and drive it to my house. And the reason that they wanted to do it at night is they were like, well, the bees will all be home. And so for them, it was just like, well, they will be there. But acknowledging also for them, not shining a white light. So they basically, had their phones, would sort of turn the light on, see where the things were, turn the light back on. So they were really moving around and doing this in the dark. And it was fascinating. The first hive that we went to, there were some honey badgers who had gotten to it, and sort of clearing that out. So there were like, and the issue there is not so much bears or raccoons, but it's baboons that like to get into the honey. So we checked a couple trees before we found a hive that hadn't been destroyed by baboons. A little different.
And you mentioned the coffee. Okay, I have all the questions. Somebody else can ask questions too. But the coffee is pollinated partly by bees, maybe, and other bees. So the beehives helped, you said. But tea is that pollinated by flies or something? Not really by bees? Not by large honeybees?
I believe tea is self-pollinating. So I think it's just open pollination, not required to be pollinated by any insects, but that the yields increase when you have additional pollination from bees or insects or flies, things like that.
Yeah.
I feel like I need some more botanists who can answer some of those questions.
You never stop studying. Yeah, I can imagine a lot of questions.
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for letting me talk, and hopefully this was interesting. And I certainly think about what I will do with bees in the US or in Africa differently as a result of some different kinds of exposure. And so maybe this was useful for you in thinking about different ways of what's possible. Again, location, 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 right? I mean, we do what we do, and we contextualize wherever we are with microclimates and weather changes and types of bees and temperaments and all of those things. But just glad to be able to share a few things of what I've seen, in hopes that it could spur some different understanding or interest from ways that beekeeping is done in other places in the world. So thank you, everybody. And I can drop I'm writing as I go. I've got a little blog, and I can drop my blog address and email in the chat box. And if anybody has any questions or suggestions, I'd be very grateful to receive those. So many thanks for the opportunity, and I will pass it over to more discussions of rainy weather and splits and queen cells and all else that's to come. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, although we might end up talking about alternative hives now that you've kind of brought up, there are some other ways we could do this. Yeah. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. That was so unique. You have a talk that I can't imagine hearing anywhere else.
Thanks. Well, I'm sure there's lots of perspectives that I have missed, even from what I've seen already. So I'm grateful for the time I think that's one of the things that's been amazing, is that people have just been so willing to just have me show up as an outsider and say, yeah, sure, we'll take you around and show you this. And I think there's, for as much as things are localized, it has a little bit of that beekeeper spirit, that there's we're kind of all in it together to make it happen.
We all have bees in our hearts. Beekeepers are a special group, and really everybody is a beekeeper or wants to know one. You say you're a beekeeper and you just started a conversation.
For real. Yeah.
Thank you so much. You gonna stay and listen to us, or gotta get
Absolutely.
on?
Yeah. No, I'm got nothing else. I'm with you guys. Thank you so much.
Okay, so Ron is threatening to, I noticed on the chat, to start making all kinds of new hive designs. You're going to have trouble with that round one, but Ron wants to do the cathedral, which is kind of based on round. It's a hive that kind of opens up. If you had a cylindrical hive and you opened it, but it's got, I think, straight sides on the side. And there's Sarah's blog and her email. It's really good. I don't know if we can talk about anything that interesting in what we're doing. Now what we're doing looks mundane.
It's not. It's not. It's important and good.
Sarah, those round plastic ones in the round, the banana leaves, reminds me of the Ross rounds I got, but just bigger. You know, the rings, the white
Yeah.
rings.
Yeah. These are,
Yeah,
they're
big and-
about like that big. How big are the ones that you have?
They're more like 3.5 inches apart. Yeah, they're much smaller, you know,
Yeah.
round.
And these
Have one laying
ones,
around.
they were excited because they could just pop, like you can literally just like push the whole thing out and just, they were like, we can sell the whole comb. It's really pretty. It's just this nice thing. So they were just, we can sell a whole sphere or whole circle of honeycomb.
Are you familiar with the Ross rounds?
No.
They're smaller, but the thing that when I take the rings out of the snap frames, I just scrape the excess wax off, put it in a plastic, kind of like a petri dish with it's plastic, and then put the top on and then label it. And you have pure honeycomb, and I sell those, and you can get a lot of money for them. So if they did something like that, oh my God, that would really be something.
Cool.
Just put-
Cool. I
Yeah,
will pass it on. Thanks.
yeah.
So Tony, you're the next presenter on comb honey, okay? Because comb honey is a little tricky to make in this area. There are people,
Yes.
actually it'd be great if people wanted to talk about making comb honey in this area, because to make good comb honey, you need a strong flow. And for the beginners, you're trying to get the bees to pull out nice new wax,
Mm-hmm.
and often you use foundationless frames. You can buy a very thin
Yes.
rolled out wax with the impressions in it, or you can buy these Ross rounds that are kind of fit together on a frame, sort of frames in a super, but you kind of have to time it because, well, like we missed the maple flow. I don't think anybody had comb honey for maple. The bees got some of it, but it wasn't a good strong flow. And if you get a good strong flow, any kind, when there's young enough bees to pull out the wax, you need a lot of young bees, that 12 to 17 days post-emergence. So it just kind of falls into spring and early summer. So blackberry might be the next chance. I've always wanted to do some comb honey. Although I would probably just do foundationless like Top Bar. And then you take the whole frame, lay it down, and cut it.
That's what I do. I use dental floss, but I have like a square, it's like a cookie cutter thing just to make an indent in it. And I use dental floss like that for the squares. I could even grab a couple samples while you guys are talking and bring it just to show you.
You want to do that? Because comb honey is one of those mysteries for most of us.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. Tony is good for all kinds of things. Anybody else do comb honey? It's really coming back in. America got into the grocery store honey that was heated to like 130 degrees at least to get it through the piping so they could bottle it in the big factories. And when we went that route, we lost comb honey, cream honey, we lost flavor, we lost nutrients, we lost so much, and we turned it into just a sweet, just a sugar thing, and not a taste sensation, a cultural thing. We lost a lot, and we all know that. Somebody else say it better than me, okay? Because we did. We lost a lot.
Eli, I have a question. Aren't there certain kinds of hives that we aren't allowed to have in Washington State? And why is that? I thought it was for treatment reasons, was what I heard.
Yeah, like any hive that does not have removable frames. So like the cathedral hive, the reason you could have it, it's kind of a long cylinder, and then it kind of has a hinge. It kind of or lifts off, the top lifts off, and you can make these frames that aren't square, but they're still removable. And the reason was for disease control, they said. That was the big reason, was disease control. You have to be able to get in to inspect. We are one of the states that does not have a state inspector. And I think from something I read that about 40 states have state inspectors of one kind for apiaries, and they would have to be able to come in. American foul brood was the most dreaded disease. That was the one that really something had to be done about. So yeah, Corinne, anybody else know anything else about it? It has to be movable. Okay, here's Tony with his Ross rounds.
4 inches across in diameter. And that's pure honeycomb, untouched by human hands. It's in the rings. You unsnap it. You just kind of clean the outside ring. You put it in a plastic, goes up halfway, and then you take the other lid, put it on, and then I get a roll that says honey, and then I put my credentials on here and everything. And I sell these. I can get $20 easy for this. It's about 14 ounces. Let me see. I'll weigh it real quick. But the net weight's about that. And then I have 4x4 square boxes. Can you see that okay? And I just put them in there. And again, I have all my credentials on there. So, but those things that you showed, God, if you had great big ones like that, oh my God, people would pay probably get $100 for.
I guarantee you I'll have them.
All right, I'm gonna weigh this, but I think let's see how many. In grams, it's 99 grams minus just a gram maybe for the casing, and ounces. It's about, let's see. I know it's more than that. Something's not right. I think it weighs a lot. I mean, it's just solid. So.
Okay, I have to ask Sarah, did you see the Apis dorsata combs actually being sold, the whole comb? Okay, I saw pictures of this, and I wondered if they really did. And there's ways to harvest. Eva Crane, you've seen Eva Crane's World History of Beekeeping and Honey Hunting, and in it she shows some of the pictures, and I think it might have been there where she was showing how they'd kind of take 2 pieces of wood and clip. It was kind of like a clothespin. You're kind of clipping the Apis dorsata comb before you cut it. So, and then you would cut right above the clip, and then you could carry the whole comb off. Although the leaving a third, especially of the brood nest, trying to leave some of the brood nest. I know there are other places where they do that.
Yeah. There's one of the ways that they're trying to modify people's practices is called Rafter Beekeeping, where literally you just like, if the branch is straight, the honey is going to be in a straight line. But if the branch is tilted at like a 45-degree angle, the Apis dorsata bees will create what's called a honey head sort of at the front part of it, where you can then cut out that honey head and not have to disturb the rest of the brood comb, so that it's, again, for people who are interested in eating the larva, or the larva has some culinary or economic value. Obviously that's, still is not going to solve the problem of sort of the hive destruction. But if people are interested in the wild honey, and in the market, wild honey is way more revered and way more expensive than the cultivated domesticated honey. So if you have that rafter beekeeping where it's just the branch is tipped and you can remove that honey head, then you still have a lot of preservation of the bees themselves. But it was, the queen sort of lays at least in the ones that I saw, she lays sort of from right to left. And so you can see this kind of wave of, you know, brood that's about ready to be hatched, and then eggs, and then open. I mean, it sort of has this like circular effect where it sort of builds out the comb to the largest size that the colony can support. And then she just keeps working kind of in a rotational way back up throughout the comb over and over again. And it's, I mean, it's just, that's why you have those striations just in one whole piece of comb. It's beautiful. But yeah, no, but I didn't see anybody sell. I didn't see in any market, I didn't see actual dorsata comb for sale, just honey.
So you're sort of doing what Eva Crane did. Kind of, you know, because she traveled the world and she has pictures of that rafter beekeeping and things like that. She has pictures from all over the world of where they were doing these different techniques.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, and then the Egyptians, I have to say that the Egyptians who did it in the clay pots, and they I guess had this long knife, and they'd cut and they'd pull out some of the honey. It was interesting. They were long, I don't know. They had to be like 3 feet long. And even to this day they still do in long tube type clay pots and various other things, mats and such. They're still a part of the world. That's, you know, it's you don't have to invest a lot of capital, as you were saying. It is a problem. Langstroth hives, even though they did take off throughout a lot of the world, and they have adopted it somewhat, and maybe adapted it somewhat, but it's a lot of capital outlay.
And also the construction specifications as well. I mean, I think, you know, there have been places where I've seen in Rwanda, people, and actually Tony in Musanze in the north near the mountain gorillas, I've seen people who they've tried to do the Langstroth boxes, but the specifications have been off, and they haven't really respected bee space in filling it appropriately with frames, and it just becomes a sticky, gooey, somebody referred to it as a propolis factory, right? I mean, it's just all stuck in there just because everything's a little bit wonky. So both for the cost of wood, and Rwanda in particular is a tiny country. So there's 12 million people. It's the densest country in Africa. Deforestation is a big problem. I mean, there's just not enough wood in the country anyway. And then to use it in constructing something where they're like, but we have banana fiber everywhere. Why would we use wood for something where we could just use banana leaves? So it just doesn't seem to make sense at all. Right? Whereas using the natural fibers that are so abundant is sort of a no-brainer. Yeah.
Sarah, when I was there, they had a program, an NGO program, where they would give someone a cow, and when that cow had a calf, they had to give it to another family and produce milk, and they were producing milk, which is pretty rare in Africa. It used to be boxed in, or ultra high temperature brought in. Is there anything like that for the bees, or maybe getting Northwest wood lumber? And
that's a good question. That program is still there. It's called Give a Cow Rwanda. It's still there. Rwanda is a huge consumer of milk. Culturally, milk and cows are very important, but I haven't heard anything about doing that with beekeeping. There's only a few. I mean, one of the main ways, because people don't have a lot of land, most production is done in co-ops. And so there'll be somebody who, will have a plot of land, and then there'll be a couple different people who are working on the land. So there's very much a partnership way of doing that. But I haven't heard of anybody sort of, split their hive and give us, or, give a portion of a hive to somebody else. That's a cool idea. I think, yeah, why not? What were you working in Rwanda for?
Oh, I was a consultant for the American Embassy for about 3 months, and
Oh.
I got to go into to Victoria Falls and
Yeah.
Zambezi River, and almost let's see, you get attacked by a hippo, and the dry river under the little bridge. Somehow it was raining up in the mountains, and the water came in, flooded it, and we almost tipped over. And I'm looking down, and there's Nile crocodiles just looking up, waiting for us to fall out of the truck. It was a great time though.
Yeah, no, I mean, you'll have those memories forever, and glad
Yeah.
you're still standing here.
That's the cleanest African country I ever been to, and you know why? Because at the end of the month, they all the village, everybody, the cities, they clean up all their garbage, and there's no garbage laying around or anything. And
Yeah,
they're
I
not
could
plastic.
do a very, very long talk on Rwanda in particular, and all of the environmental standards that are in Rwanda.
Yeah,
It's awesome. But I will have to apologize for that, because I would be taking people very much off topic, but it's
yeah,
a pretty special place for sure.
sure. Where's your next? Are you're gonna go to another country soon, or?
I am. I actually have a friend's belated birthday in Florence, Italy. So I have to be there for a 40th birthday that's now happening in her 42nd year, thanks to COVID delays. And so I'm looking to meet with sort of old school, Italian beekeepers. So if anybody knows any, I've got a couple weeks to put this together. So if anybody knows any beekeepers in Italy, feels like that's kind of going back to the source for so many of the Italian bees that we have in the US. It feels like that is an interesting path to go to. And then from there, I'm headed to back to Ethiopia. And I have, you may have seen in that I had photos of honey and photos of historical stuff in Ethiopia, but not actually, I haven't had a chance to really interact with beekeepers in Ethiopia. So I'm looking to see if there's different ways that beekeepers are working in Ethiopia, particularly in the mountains. So Rwanda, the beekeepers that I met in Rwanda are at Akagera Park, which is a big national park, and like sort of on the eastern side of the country, close to Tanzania. And then same in Kenya, it's mostly the flatland savannas. But I'm particularly interested to see how beekeeping changes for someplace like in northern Ethiopia, where you have much less rain. And also, I mean, the thing about Ethiopia is it gets cold at night. I mean, it's down to 48 degrees right now at night in Ethiopia every night. So they deal a little bit more with the cold weather. So I'm interested to see what adaptations they have that are different from Rwanda and Kenya, just by temperature. Yeah, we'll see. Another presentation after my travels. Goodness. Okay. I'm definitely also going to run out of money soon too for this. So it can't go on forever, but I'm certainly enjoying the moments I have.
So I have a couple questions. So it sounds like you're mostly working with native bee they aren't, it sounds like in Mexico, there were some that were not native to Mexico. And they don't have any varroa or any mites, trichomites or any kind of mite or hive beetles or, American foul brood or whatever. What are the main diseases they're dealing with?
Yeah, good question. I did not go too deep into that. I did meet, so at the EcoSur lab, I did meet with somebody who is working specifically with Apis mellifera. So that just wasn't an area I went deep into, because some of the practices that they were using there were very similar than a lot of the practices that we do here in the US. So they were rearing queens. They're doing some work at this lab in Chiapas around figuring out queen pheromones and really sort of trying to categorize different queen pheromones. So they have a small apiary of Apis mellifera. They smoke the bees, they split the hives, they rear the queens. And on my blog, there's a post around queen rearing. I had never done that before, but it's fascinating. Many of you have probably done it before, but pulling out 1 to 2 day old queens, putting them in these little plastic queen cups, inserting them into a hive that was queenless. So just really just kind of seeing like how that happens. And so they're producing, you know, those actually should hatch today. So I've asked the guy to give me a heads up of when those queens hatch. But they, you know, obviously they need to move them at some point into their own little, it's almost like those small rounds you just had, these small little queen cages inside the hive for the queen cups, so that the queens, when they hatch, won't kill each other, because they're all within the span of one hive that is queenless. But I did not go deep, Karen, to answer your question on what the different issues are that are facing Apis mellifera in Mexico. So that was a long way of saying I don't know. Sorry for that.
And we can give Sarah a break and talk about local beekeeping too. I did promise, and I'm willing to stay all night. So just in case.
Does anybody else know anything about Mexican beekeeping? I mean, I feel like that's sort of the closest in terms of border. Like, does anybody else have experience with seeing anything from that perspective of Apis mellifera? I know apparently it's World Bee Day this weekend or something. And there were a lot of events that were happening in Mexico scheduled for this coming weekend as well. So I'm a little bummed that I didn't make it there for this weekend if I had timed it differently. But I think of it a little bit in the same way that, like, for International Women's Day gets celebrated so much around the world, but not that much in the US. And I sort of feel like International Bee Day, I've seen a lot of things kind of pop up with the different communities that I've been speaking to around activities related to that. But I'm not sure if there's anything really happening in the US for International Bee Day.
Michael, can't hear you.
Now, hello.
I can hear you now.
Yeah, lean a little toward the microphone.
Yeah, I was trying to use the headphones so that I wouldn't get the feedback from the speakers, and I was trying it out, and apparently the microphone doesn't work when the headphones are plugged in. So anyways, I had a question for you, Eli, if you know of any of Ava Crane's works that Sara could use for reference for Ethiopia, to kind of pre-research her trip up there, because I know that Ava Crane did a lot of travel, and I don't know, are you familiar with Ava Crane, Sara? Yeah, you're shaking your head yes. So
Yeah. I think, I mean, where she and I differ is she's actually a scientist. She actually knows what she's talking about. And you know, her books have been an absolute wealth of knowledge. And it's just so cool to be able to be like, okay, pick a country and flip through. I mean, just really just awesome reference guide. Yeah.
And like you, she just got people to talk to her. Because actually a woman who was young at the time of World War II and traveling around the world, and she just got people to talk to her in all these different countries. I just find that amazing that she did this. She didn't die until like 2000 something, 2008 or something. And she spent so much of her life, and she traveled, she talked to people, she collected information. Is it called the IBRA today, the International Bee Research Association or something, and it's a biggest repository, and then out of it came several other. So she left such a legacy behind. Yes, you should be the next Eva Crane.
I would be honored. Those are big shoes to fill. And I think, I mean, one of the things that I've been thinking about is, again, the things that I've presented and the things that I've written are what I've been able to absorb. And I think it would be interesting to do if I end up writing this or turning this into something more, to maybe co-author with people from the communities that I'm in conversation with, because I think there's a different perspective that people from communities can also offer up, so that it's not just my voice or not just my perspective, but also to think, truly there's lots that I'm missing or overlooking, or, again, this is just touching the top of the surface on a lot of these topics and perspectives. So it could be really interesting to have, if I were to do this presentation over again, or if time differences and language was not a challenge, to have other co-presenters and other voices from the communities as well. I think that would be really pretty cool.
I really appreciate you kind of taking that anthropological, doing those disclaimers of accepting your own bias and recognizing that you have a filter that you're seeing the world through. I really appreciated that portion of your introduction. That's because that's the right way to do it. And it's nice that you are aware of all that,
Thanks, Karen. Yeah.
And Eva Crane was too. She never was judgmental. She went and visited all these places and just reported as much as she could. For example, you had that one woman who took her husband's place in a culture where the men had this. But part of it was, if she hadn't done that, I'll bet her family would have lost the sort of a right to keep things culturally. There's even areas of the forest or jungle in certain places that kind of have historically been yours down to the tree. And that's the kind of thing that Eva Crane would just say, well, that's the way they do it. That's how you respect other people's rights and where the boundaries are culturally. And
yeah, lots of conversations around even the concept of beekeeping, right? Like when I was talking with some folks, just to say, oh, hi, I'm coming to Thailand. I'm interested to learn about traditional beekeeping. I mean, I had people who very first conversation were so kind to correct me and say, well, beekeeping is sort of a Western notion, right? Like we don't keep bees. We hunt honey, or we're in community with bees, right? So just even that the language that we have sometimes can indicate our own concept or understanding, which is really different than other concepts or other understandings. All right, guys, I think I'm to the end of my knowledge. I think you tapped me out. I know nothing more.
that's okay. Take your next trip and come on back and we'll do it again, okay? Thank you so much.
Thanks. And I'm gonna turn my audio and video off, and I'm gonna hang out here with you guys for a few. And yeah, thanks for having me.
And you're still recording, Eli.